Comfort Goodridge Lawrence. I am the daughter of James WILFRED Goodridge and Augusta, as commonly called PETU, Porte Goodridge. I'm the fifth of their union of 8 children. I am, my grandmother, parents are James N.D. Goodridge, my father's dad. His parents came from the Barbados and landed in Crusoeville. And my grandfather is Joshua Port. My grandmother is Nancy Garnett Goodridge Padmore. Memorable fun times at my grandparents, Jacob Padmore and Nancy in Crusoeville, where, I mean, they're memorable. They go with you forever because there were so many children in that home. And my grandparents, they both were gentle people, gentle souls, and very giving. We look forward to our holidays spent there because Patty and Gran would go and order things for us from Montgomery Ward and Sears. And so Christmas, Easter, any holidays, we're looking forward to new clothes, new shoes, and food. So everybody wanted to be in Crusoeville. We always wanted to be in Crusoeville. So living there was very comfortable. Every vacation we would come up and spend some time going to Bud John's farm and just enjoying ourselves. The house was always lively. Even though Gran was a very quiet person, she directed her home. She had matters in control. Patty, he was a very quiet person himself. He spent time doing his reading and the newspaper or books. When he was in Monrovia, he would let us know when he came from Monrovia as to what he did for the week down there. They were two, like I said before, gentle people who made family the center of their lives. They also were church-centered people. And that meant that we went to church regularly. We did programs. We did Sunday school with the church directors. But Gran made sure we went to school. You got up early in the morning, either got dressed and got a ride. If you were late, you had to walk. I did not go to school in Crusoeville, but I remember having to get up and go to school in Bensonville. So the household was just always a lot of people. Weekends were very crowded. Was very crowded because we would look forward to Sunday when every family member would be coming from all over the place and come and join us for service, and then for the big dinner, big lunch. So it was a lot of fun. Patty let us just be ourselves, and he and Gran, like I said, were quiet people, but enjoyed the grandchildren being around. Grandfather Joshua Port was from Crusoeville, and so was his wife, EVELINA. And she was EVELINA Williams. They got married and had 4 children, and both their parents came from the Barbados. Well, my grandmother, people came from Barbados because she was also a Braithwaite. There was the oldest was Julia Port. Then there was Alberta Port Johnson. There was Augusta Port, my mother, P2, and then they had one son, Julius Port. My grandmother was a homemaker. She stayed at home, and she was also, we call her the nurse of the family because everybody was sick. EVELINA was there with her Vicks rubs and giving you all the medication she thought you could have. And she raised her children, and she was there to help whenever she could. Any of the children, she went with them wherever. But she also was very quiet. I think she had a marriage before my grandfather, but it didn't last long. With Horatio Padmore, it was a short-lived marriage. And then they had one child that passed away before I was born, so I didn't get to know her. But I like the idea of my grandparents, Joshua and EVELINA, because they were cordial to each other, regardless of what we, as young children, just knew them to be our grandparents who were caring and giving to all of us. We had medicines that as a child, I had to have gripe water from my own memory because I always had a tummy ache. I had an umbilical hernia, and I guess my parents didn't know what to do with it. So I had gripe water. They gave us liquid fruta for colds and coughs. We had castoria and castor oil that I remember also taking this worm medicine. It was pink pill. I don't remember what it was called. And I remember running out of the house one day because I had a worm coming from the wrong place and everybody tied me down. But I hated medicines when I was a child. But those were some, the Vicks rub was a big thing for all families. They were rubbing us with Vicks and donor grease. But we were forced to drink that liquor fruta to help us because we always had colds. My father was a man of principle. He was a man he believed in having a character. James WILFRED Goodridge, he would tell you to introduce himself, and he would add at the end, MC. So everybody wants to know, what's MC, Dad? Master of crooks. In other words, I'm letting you know you can't pull anything over me. So that's my name. So he also loved clothes. A friend of mine, and his father was his friend. And he did business with him. So he did that. You know, he was also involved in farming. He did a lot of distilling of rum. He had a rubber farm and he had sugarcane farms. He also decided to go back to school. He went to the Carisburg Law School. Later on, he merged with Alfred Menza and did some road construction, including the Robert C. Highway and I think roads to Capanas, the Capanas Highway. And he was project manager of those projects. So he did a few things in his life that he felt comfortable doing. You know, he enjoyed just being a servant, giving to his community. Him and Mr. Lensa got along very well. It was after that when he retired from Mensa Construction, he came to the United States for medical reasons, and he stayed here until his death. My father has this saying, we asked him for something in his way of saying, we can't do it now, I don't have the money. He would say, Mama need new pair of shoes, no money. And you were supposed to understand that at the time he couldn't do it. And he had another saying that we all love, but my husband especially, Dad said, if you can't cut ass, don't molest. In other words, you can't deal with this situation, don't attempt it. You know, or you can't beat this guy or this girl that looking bigger than you, don't go there. And he was that kind of character, you know. My fondest memory though was during my wedding when my father sat me down and he was talking one day and we were talking about him and my mother, and he told me, PETU, she wasn't easy, so don't mind her. She called me one day, I needed help. So I said, what that means? I said, you know, Dad, I only remember one time when you spanked me, and that was the one and only time he ever beat me in my life. But that was the only time because I heard a story of him whipping some of my siblings, but I never got a whipping from him. That was the only whipping. And then I told him later on that, I think it was during my time of discussion about my wedding, I said, you know, I came from America because the day, and I brought a gun. I said, if any man ever touches me, he's going to wear my gun. He said, don't you ever let your husband hear that. Don't you ever say that. Actually, I think you should get rid of that gun. I was just joking, but my father took it so seriously. He thought I had a gun. He had heard stories about all the American women that had guns. So he told me I should never say that, and I should never think about owning a gun, even though he had guns all his life in his home, but they were always locked away. My mother her children call her the Proverbs 31 mother. I call her the 1 Corinthians 14:3 mother. Because she was gentle, love, and peace. She always, love and patience. And that's what Corinthians tell us about someone. She gave love and she gave patience. My mom was so selfless. She put everybody before herself. Even her siblings called her silly PETU. They thought everything she did, but that was her nature. She was just such a godly woman, very sweet, very giving of self, and she was dear in so many ways. She served us, whether we're married or when we were younger. She was there for us. She took a career path and left Crozaville and we moved to Monrovia at the urgings of her cousin, the late First Lady Mrs. Antoinette Tubman, who she took PETU under her arms with her children to Monrovia and had her work with her at the mansion. Mama became one of her right-hand people personally and gave care to the children of the mansion. There was Cuckoo, Banky, uh, Sonia, so many young children, John and William Tubman, and they all remember her and loved her because she was just such a good-hearted person. She controlled things in a very gentle way. She would get angry and in her older days and tell her grandchildren that she would kick them and they would tease her back and say, Big Mom, what effort you got to kick us with? She said, you just try me. But my mom was a godly woman, and I think those values that she shared with us and her, she uses this phrase all the time, the Lord will provide. And she told us that never let any challenges get us because God was always faithful and he lived up to his promises. And God's grace was bigger than any sin or any problem we could have. That's powerful. So I remember my mother for being that spiritual woman, being herself, working hard. She worked hard. She moved to Monrovia from Crozaville. She had to make her living. At one time, she was riding a bicycle from work to home. We didn't believe that, but she did. And she just was, in her later days in America, she was such a helping hand to Rose, our older sister, and her children. Because she, in America, you need help sometimes when you have children. And Mama was right there with it. So my children they got to know her, but didn't get to spend as much time with her as I would have liked, including spending a lot of time with my dad, but he came and spent time with us. They got to know him, and it was a blessing because I was away a lot in my teenage years from both of my parents. I was with my aunt in America. And so I didn't get to spend my teenage years with them. So I was blessed when they got to meet my young children and spend time with them. There was also Ann Kit Holder. There was, Ann Kit was a riot. She was just funny and was always joking. But there was also Jerusha Holder. And those ladies were there for my mother. I don't remember, I was small at the time, or maybe not even born when Mama said those were her mothers, all of them she could rely on. There was also Miss Julia Williams, who lived right down. I think she was a Talbot and married to Williams. And she was always there for my mother because these are the women that looked after, my parents got married very young. So there was my mother. Before you knew it, she was having one child after another, so she needed some kind of counsel or help. And those are the women she depended on. And we always loved going to Crozaville and visiting with them when we always went home. And Jerusha Holder's house was a house we played in a lot because she had grandchildren. There was Charlotte that lived there, but we had Juanita and Ella Lou that we would come and play with from time to time. And these women were part of the village, as you would say, that raised us all. Mm-hmm. Her best quality was just being there for us. She was another one, as I said, who spent many years paying LPA to make sure her children went to some of the best schools. Whether it was CWA or St. Teresa's Convent or not, she made sure that we went to school and her bills were paid. So we call her the LPA lady as well. So I knew there might be someone I didn't know because my grandmother had a set of twins that I don't remember anything about. But my father brothers that I remember were, we call him Bob Blake. The oldest one was Jonathan Goodridge, Bob Blake, for Charlie, for Amos, for John, and Uncle Bethel. And they all had funny things about them, as you well know, because they were they had their little cliquish sayings that they would do to say to each other, and nobody in the room would understand what they were saying. But they had a special language among themselves. And but Blake was the eldest of them all, so he was the father head of the family, as they did. And so he was there for us in so many ways, especially for me as well. He made sure I got certain things, I got to certain places I needed to go, and he contributed to my education. Even though I was in the States, he made sure I was taken care of as well. My Uncle Charles was very funny. He would take us to his farm and show us how they would go hunting. And but he didn't interact very much because he stayed away a lot. He was on the phone. When I remember, you know, I didn't have a lot of time with him, but he was always kind and gentle and brought some meat by the house every time we were there visiting with Gran. He would bring some food for her to prepare for us. And my uncle John really enjoyed going to his farm because he and Auntie Janetta would always make us feel special. We came from Monrovia, they had people cooking for us. We would go swimming in the river. We just had fun. It was very, very nice. His children, we were close with Cleo and the whole batch, Eliza and Bill. And, you know, their children were special to us. And, well, Amos, he was such a gentleman, but he was very stern. Even with his own kids, he was very stern. So we all were, we got to be careful when we're around for Amos before he says something, you know, correct you. But he was always hardworking. He lived in Town most of the time because he worked for the Ministry of Public Works, where he did road construction and supervised that kind of work out of town. But his kids were also, we all were close. You see, in the Goodridge family, as you all know, first cousins were not first cousins. We're brothers and sisters. Like our fathers, their wives were close. And so we as first cousins were brothers and sisters. So like Gladys and Amos and Nat, all of us were brothers and sisters. And when it came to my uncle, the last of them was the youngest, Richmond. He was the one I would like to hang with. I used to like to hang with because he lived in Monrovia. He was Mr. Martin man, and I would come to Monrovia and go to the bank, and he would introduce us to everybody in the bank, making us feel important. And up until Buddha was older, he would play cards with us sometimes, and I enjoy that. I still have fond memories of him, even now, being the one that always would spend time trying to tell us about things going on in Monrovia. My Aunt Julia, Pet, sent for me to come to the States when I was, oh God, it was 1965. So I must have been about 12, 13 years old. And she wanted me to come since my older sister, Addie, couldn't come at the time. She really wanted her because she raised Addie and she wanted Addie to be with her as a daughter. But when Addie couldn't come at the time, she made sure Mama prepared me to come, and it was a good thing. I came, and Auntie Pat was married to this American man who was very gentle and kind. Hawkins was his name at the time. And when I got here, I met my cousins, Nathaniel Eastman and his family, his wife, Rachel, and their kids. They lived in Long Island, and I spent a lot of time there with them. Actually, they lived in Rico Park. Yeah, that's what it was. And I got to spend time with them a lot. Most of the time when my aunts went on vacation or doing other things, I was there in Rico Park with them. And I met Noel Dennis and his wife, Maud Parker. Dennis, to live in the same building in Rico Park, and their children. and I cousin Wesley, I can't think of her name. Well, I met a lot of people. Corinna, what's her name? Holder. She was married to Wesley, and that his daughter was Cynthia, who became my very good friend. And Antipa was very good friends with them. It was Martha Holder who was married to this guy. And so I met them. I rarely met Mrs. Stevenson. Jean Stevenson was a friend of my Aunt Julia. And her home was open to all Liberians, actually. When she was at the Consulate General, I was given the opportunity to work with her on my holidays. And when I was in high school, and I worked there just as a clerk, answering the phone here and there. But she was such a sweet woman. She opened her home to all of the foreign students, Liberian students that were here. And I got to know her children, and Gwen and Yvonne. And I got also to meet the Bonds, the former ambassador Bonds, and his daughter Ruthie, and a whole lot of other Liberians that I can't remember names now. But I met one of my cousins, Mutti's father, Lasana Padmore, who was married to. Anyway, I met them because they lived in Brooklyn at the time. So I lived in Brooklyn with my aunt, and I went to PS 290, I think it was 294. That was my middle school. After I left that school, I went to high school. I went to Lafayette High School in Shipsa Bay. And being in America was a good eye-opener for me to decide what I wanted to do. What I really wanted to do was to be a hospital administrator. And what I did with my education was, after high school, I went into Kingsborough Community College because I wanted to do a nursing program, which I thought would get me to where I wanted to go. But then I realized shortly thereafter that, no, I needed to be in the business field. So I transferred to Temple University in Pennsylvania, and I got a degree in business administration and industrial relations. And then I enrolled at Penn State for 1 semester. And after that, I was convinced by my cousin Winston Richards and his supervisor, his boss, I guess, Gabriel Tucker, the late Gabriel Tucker, that I, rather than coming right back to school, I needed to take some time off and live in Liberia, work in Liberia, and come to know Liberia, because I had left at such an early age, and it was time for me to reacclimate myself to the culture and whatnot. And so that was interesting, because I never got back to grad school. I stayed in Monroe because I was offered a job at Public Works. But my journey to America was very good. It was eye-opening, and I learned a lot about my family and how they always reached out and helped each other at times of need. You can't survive in America sometimes without some kind of help. So that was that. My Aunt Julia was my rock. I think we had a simple wedding, yet it was a blessed wedding. My father was so proud to be able to walk me down the aisle, and I was so proud to make sure he walked me down the aisle, because all my life as an adult, well, as a teenager, my dream was to go to Coney Island in some cut-off jeans and be married on the beach. But then I met this man who wasn't going to have any of that. He was supposed to be proper, whatever that was. So my dad went along with him and said, okay, I'm going to pay for this wedding and you're going to do it right. So we're going to have a wedding in Crusoe. My mother was in the States, so I had lots of people rooting for me and being there for me. My Aunt Comfort Goodridge insisted we had the wedding reception at their home, she and my uncle's home, Jonathan Goodridge's home. And of course, the church was the church I got baptized in, and I worshiped in as a young girl, and I was getting married there. So it was an exciting time for me. And then I was getting married to this guy that had wooed me. I was really in love, and I thought that this was the love of my life. So I was just right at home. It was a very good occasion. We had beautiful food that was catered by Tula Dennis at the time. My cake I liked because it was made by Erna and Myrna Cooper, Erna Cooper. But Joe's friends made the wedding fun. You know, I remember the guys, the Earl Burrows, the Winsor Riches, the Walton Greaves, all those crazy men ended up at our home in Crosserville. I mean, I'm sorry, in Robertsfield, from Crosserville to Robertsfield that night. And the party continued. So it was really a really wonderful wedding because I hadn't imagined being married and giving away to my dad. I thought I would just run over and be married somewhere on the beach somewhere. So it was a nice time. I had lots of family there. Sharon was there. She can tell me more about it. But I think it was a nice time. I got to meet a lot of people that I hadn't interacted with since I had been home. So it was a good time for me. We had, well, raising our kids, interacting with the Liberian culture and the American culture was not too difficult for us because we had an idea that we had learned a lot from our parents. They were disciplinarians, and we could pass that on to our children. I grew up in America as a teenager, and I think I was blessed to know good from bad or right from wrong. And I intended to impart that to my children. So we did that. In our home, we're Liberians. There was a Liberian home, and you went to school, but when you came home, you were a Liberian person. Even you were born in America, you were still a Liberian person. So Juno got to learn that at a very early age. So we had no problems because we had house rules and they abide to them, or there were consequences. So we were blessed in raising our kids really at early ages. They were very responsible for being accountable as to where they were at all times. And so we had no real serious disciplinary problems when they were young children. In the 70s, when I got back to Liberia, I saw Liberia as a prospering place, economically, infrastructure-wise, and education. We have lost a lot of that over the years because of the coup in Liberia. But I think when Liberia starts to turn around again, these generations will also pick up that and bring it to Crosserville, because these are the dreams that the ancestors had for us. And I think that in appreciating what they did would be us continuing to build on what their goals were. You know, the one thing I would like to mention before I go, that my kids, you know, I always say to them, they always say to me, Mommy, why you say that? But it's true. They never will have the childhood that I had, the life I had in Liberia. When I grew up with my cousins, you know, it was age related also, because my older cousins like EVERETT and his friends would come around and we would try to impress their friends by learning how to do their dance and learning their music. Everett was a prankster. There was a time when he had a Volkswagen. I came home on one holiday after I had been in the States, and he had this Volkswagen that had no seat in the back. And he put a little chair in that car. And I got in the car and we went, just God save our lives that night. But when we got back to the house to go in the house, the soldier who was guiding the house of Blake said, no, you can't come in, because to Everett, he couldn't come home. His father said to stay where he went because we had overstayed the night. So Everett used me, of course, and said, well, my little sister is here. And I'm sure my pa didn't tell you she shouldn't come in the house. And he wooed his way through, got by the soldier, and that's how he got in the house that night. We had to get it. But can you imagine risking your life to be in a car, not on a seatbelt, no seat in the car, sitting in a little child's chair? But I enjoyed those days. I enjoy, and in Crossover, I remember, you know, we talk about doing duties or chores in the house. We didn't do very much. The younger you were, the better you were, because the older kids did the work. The Sister Beatrice and Sister Teresa took care of the girls and the girls' clothes, and we just hung around and pretended we were working or doing something or learning from them, because they had to show us how to make up our beds and how to take care of our clothes. One lesson I would like to remember, I'd like to mention about my grandmother, she, at 11 years old, she told me to spend time with the guy who was doing, the people that were doing the laundry for the day. She said, you need to know how it's done. She said, you could be rich and married to a rich man, but if you don't know what you're paying someone to do for you, then you haven't learned anything, then you know nothing. If the person does the job halfway, how would you know? And that carried with me. Nancy Goodridge Padmore taught me that lesson, that no job is too big or too small for you to put yourself in and learn the ins and outs of it, especially when we came to your home. And she said that day, and the entire day I spent shadowing the people doing the laundry, because and then she made me stand up to the ironing board and iron her shirt that day. And I was 11 years old. So I tell my kids that you will never have the kind of life we had because we had fun. And those principles I took to my children. Joselle hates me today for me making her work and iron even her siblings' clothes when she was the oldest one. But those are valuable things we cherish, you know? And I wouldn't have had it any other way. My mother, my grandmothers, I cherish them because they imparted a whole lot of values to my life. And I thank you, Cherine, specifically for starting this project for us to learn about our ancestors and how important their vision was and their dreams for us. So we continue this journey because it's important for the generations to come.